This is a Global Player original podcast.
Hello, I'm Shelagh Fogarty, popping up in the Whole Show podcast feed, but I think you might enjoy this, certainly hope so, our LBC Christmas special. Quite a year, it always is, isn't it? Another unprecedented chapter in UK politics, and this is just part one. If you like what you hear, you'll find part two exactly where you found this. So let's get into it. James and Iain, I don't know about you, but when I think back on a year news-wise, I immediately draw a blank, and then a minute later, the whole thing floods in. I've just been doing it.
Let's hope that happens now.
Well, I hope so. Yeah, but I was just thinking. Well, I immediately go to the politics. Then I start thinking about the calls that we've taken, and then randomly, 2 seconds in, somebody reminds me that I reported for 12 hours on a ledge at the Coronation, the small matter of the Coronation. I mean, I know you're not quite as giddy as I get about royal stories, but it was an historic moment, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And I went to something. I went to the thing at Windsor Castle, which was quite nice as well. Oh, yeah. I've got friends in high places. I just keep it very quiet.
It was awful.
Were you there?
No,
you had to be there, Iain, to appreciate the full effect.
Remind me what happened at Windsor Castle.
Well, I'll take that. We're there at one point. Paid £14 for a pizza. It was a very special.
It was a big concert,
yes,
wasn't it? That's right.
Yes.
That's right. Gosh.
Nicole out of the Pussycat Dolls was there. But no, I enjoyed the scenes from the Abbey. I did think that. But it's a weird one, isn't it, as you get older, because it is objectively absurd. And yet it is quite moving and impressive. And I think probably one of those things where you should dial down the cynicism and the sense of the absurd as you get older.
It was, I thought, quite impactful, and it was different to 1953. Not that obviously I can remember 1953, contrary to popular rumour.
Absolutely not.
But they had adapted it. They certainly shortened it, and there were fewer people in the Abbey. I think there were 8,000 in 1953 and only 2,500 this time.
Oh, is that?
And
right?
it was quite a spectacle.
And they roughed it up around the edges, didn't they?
Yeah.
And let Catholics in for the first time.
I know.
Down with that sort of thing.
We have to disagree with, aren't there? But there we go.
Whatever next.
And Penny Mordaunt, obviously star of the show.
No, the Queen was the star of the... Oh, God.
The King was it's an easy mistake to make.
I'm not over it yet.
Penny Mordaunt's ratings among Conservative Party members went through the roof after she successfully carried, was it an axe?
A sword.
A sword. She successfully carried a sword. It's just extraordinary.
And fast forward to fight for your country.
Do you think the second thing would have happened if the first thing happened?
No, I think the Sword of Truth led her to the speech.
Yes,
I really do.
I think you're right.
I really do.
What speech is this? I missed this.
The
You
conference.
did not.
I did.
The speech where Penny Mordaunt was standing there saying, "Fight! Fight!"
Because that is what Conservatives do. We fight
Each other!
on the beaches.
Do you not think she was just quoting Hugh Gaitskell? We'll fight, fight, fight again to save the party we love.
Gaitskell was both coherent and quite impressive when he did that. Unfortunately, Penny Mordaunt was neither of those things. You've got a treat. We could maybe play a clip in. I don't know.
Can I be the absolute girl of the group and go back to how fabulous she looked at the Coronation?
She did look great.
She did look amazing at the Coronation, as did Catherine, Princess of Wales. We saw her for the first time in full regalia, didn't we? Which was quite significant in her new role. Well, it's not really that.
I can't get used to her being Princess of Wales.
No, I can't.
You kind of automatically think of Diana in that role.
Yeah, you do.
I certainly do still, yeah. I mean, she's doing a great old job. Can I ask you both a question, actually? Because I'm that weird breed of not a full-throated monarchist, but not a full-throated Republican either. And I found myself... I'm the Liberal Democrat of...
I thought you were a full-throated monarchist.
No. I love the Queen.
Right.
I love the froth.
Oh, okay.
I loved Queen Elizabeth II. I loved the froth. I loved the royal weddings and all of that, and the gossipy, who's marrying who stuff. I love all of that. So I'm guilty of.
Just remind me, who wrote the Prince Charles chapter in my Kings and Queens book?
I did.
But you're not a full-throated.
And then you
monarchist.
rewrote it.
I did.
Rewrote it.
I literally wrote it. You can see
There's
why.
a reason why you rewrote it. Yeah. You rewrote it for me because I'm just a peasant and I haven't learned to write or read yet. But I'm genuine. I'm not a full.
What's the question?
There's no question. I'd be perfectly relaxed if we changed the system.
See, I wouldn't be.
I know you wouldn't be.
I am not. I mean, I do this thing every Friday morning on Good Morning Britain, and there's always a royal story.
You've just done a book plug and now a TV plug. Is anyone keeping count?
I roll my eyes every time they want to talk about Harry and Meghan.
I love it.
And I just think, haven't we got more important things to talk about?
No, not more.
But
go on.
I would not want to see the monarchy disappear from this country. But something about this country would change for the worse if we didn't have a monarchy. I know it's preposterous. If we were inventing something, we wouldn't do it. But it just
still
feels
works.
wrong.
I used to think that. I used to think what you just said. But I do increasingly wonder whether you can ever really shrug off the yokes of deference and class hierarchies when you have such an obvious and prominent pinnacle. How do you teach aspiration to children when the evidence of the the sign that you're born under having so much more to do with your future than anything else?
Deference is a word that's almost disappeared from our lexicon now, isn't it?
Not on my show. I use it all the time. I think you can only explain a lot of recent Tory successes through the lens of deference.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. If you put...
I thought I had deference to you.
I have a no.
You did too, didn't you?
That's just not fair. A curly perm and shell suit test. If you were to put someone in a curly perm and shell suit and then see whether a curly perm, so like a tight scouse perm from the calm down.
Okay.
Do you remember?
Is this where we're going?
Yes. You put someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg in a curly perm and a shell suit and nobody would think he was worth listening to on any subject under the sun. But because he sort of has this confected patrician drawl and looks like a sort of throwback to the days when we were all tootling around town on penny farthings, people automatically presume that he's got something interesting.
Defers to it.
Oh, they do.
They?
Oh, God, of course, everyone who tunes into GBBs.
Well, but to bring it back to royalty, even if you saw, and I think there are good and bad things about this, when you looked at when Charles and William, just ahead of the Queen's funeral, when Charles and William by Lambeth Palace went along that line of people waiting and met them, I thought it was a nice moment for a lot of the people who'd been standing and waiting. Of course it was. I'm not going to be uber cynical about it. But at the same time, that deference that James is talking about was oozing out of that crowd.
I don't think it was deference, it was emotion.
It was a combination
there was no
of things.
tugging of forelocks there.
Metaphorically.
No, but there is the you are special thing.
Being there is tugging a forelock.
Yeah, but celebrities are considered special. People don't defer to them.
But they're generally famous because of something they've done. Not exclusively in this day and age, I grant you, but generally they've, written a best-selling book, for example.
Oh my God. I can see where this is going to be like. I want to bring it back
to how to be right. No, that was the previous one.
That was the first.
I actually just had
how they broke
just
Britain.
So you know about your book, because if we're fair, we've got to write about the book, what you edited, what I wrote in, and then talk about his. I've just had a text from my friend in Ireland who received the book you very kindly signed, and they're delighted.
Oh, well,
they're delighted, so that's good.
Have they read it yet?
No.
Don't need to read
it's a
it.
gift for someone else. Exactly. So we'll see what happens. But the point I was going to make about the royal thing that has started to irritate me, and this has only really kicked in since the new era began, and again, it isn't. I've talked about it on air. It isn't an attack on Catherine, Princess of Wales. The stuff she does on early years, children, foundational years of child's life, it's all good. It's all sensible. It's all sound. We know it already, and it's become a vehicle for her to be lionised and deferred to, using that word, deferred to. She doesn't claim to be an expert, but she's spoken about as though she is becoming one, when all she's doing is, and this isn't inherently a bad thing, she is using her convening power that we hear so much about with royalty. She's using her convening power to get people around the table to talk about important issues. But I'm starting to just think, look, I don't need these issues attached to a pretty princess. I need policy that fixes them.
And you've got Andrea Leadsom, early years minister, providing that.
Well, or is she?
God's sake.
Well, actually, to be fair, she is. I mean, it's something that she has worked on for years.
Right.
And having been in the cabinet...
When she wasn't busy becoming an expert on international trade.
I don't think she was ever trade minister, was she?
No, but she often appeared on television during the post-Brexit period, claiming to know more about international trade than Pascal Lamy, the Director General of the World Trade Organization.
On early years,
yes,
she has made this her thing, and she does know a lot about it. And credit to her. She's come back into government at the lowest possible rank to do it. And I think that's
I hope it works, because the nursery sector is saying it isn't working the way it's designed at the moment, and
we're all screwed.
There's shades of the care sector going on with the nursery sector as well, and so that's just on the royal thing.
No, but what you described is a conversation taking place where they cast around the table to see who could come up with the best cause for her brand. And that conversation probably did take place. Yeah. And they probably settled on early years stuff for precisely that reason. There's also,
she's very good with kids, to be fair.
I'm sure she is. But then sending her own children to post Christmas presents to less privileged, that stuff sticks in my craw a bit. And the homelessness stuff.
I was thinking about that.
How many houses do you have to have before you're not allowed to comment on the terribleness of homelessness? Is there an upper limit? Is there a threshold?
I know it annoys you, and I'm not quite as rabid as this one.
It's not rabid, it's a question.
What annoys me? What do you know that annoys me?
No, this business of just knocking the royals.
It's a constructive question.
I asked the same question about the kids going to the thing. But when I was a child and had a safe home and was at a great school, looked after, and all the rest of it, we went and visited old ladies and gave them Christmas hampers, and we put what we used to call Good Shepherd collections, Catholics, Good Shepherd collections for children that didn't have what we had. So it's. In a way, what they're doing is building into those young children, their young children, the royals, they're building into them the same thought for others that was built into us, I suppose you could argue.
You could argue that. You could also sing a verse of the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate.
Why
God made them high and lowly. I don't think we're doing carols until the second half of this, are we? That's not quite a carol either.
Everyone's just switched off.
Okay. Sorry, I talked over you there.
But I've always thought this idea that just because you don't experience something, you can't empathise with it. So it's like everyone says, "Oh, Rishi Sunak, he's so rich. What can he know about the cost of living crisis?" It's like Anne Widdecombe once said to me. I was sort of going on about how on earth can you? I know this is taking a turn.
Andrea Leadsom and Anne Widdecombe. It's Doris next. It'll be Doris. If we go for Doris next for the hat trick,
we'll come on to.
He cast himself as Macbeth in this little vignette.
No, just. Anne Widdecombe.
I'm going to mention Derek Hatton in a minute.
You remember she used to write novels, which she seems to have given up for it, but they were actually rather good.
Were they raunchy?
And there was a bit of sex in one of them on page 55. She always denied, but I actually read it out to her once, and she had to admit that it was a little bit.
It was sex.
It was a little bit. Yeah.
She denied it was sex.
But shall I get to where I'm going?
Please, really quickly.
She said... Because I was taking her to task, how can you write about Second World War France and a love story between a French girl and a Nazi soldier? How can you write about that? You know nothing about love because you've famously only been in love once. And she said, well, Ruth Rendell must have committed an awful lot of murders if she writes about murders so well.
Good point.
Which is a good point.
Good point, well made.
It was a very, very bad question from you. That's giving the lie to almost every work of fiction that's ever been written. You weren't at the Crusades, Bernard Cornwell. How dare you write about
when you interview Anne Widdecombe, you do have to, as Cliff Richard would say,
hang on, we've got to talk about Cliff. We've got to talk about Cliff.
Wind her up and let her go.
Yeah.
Politics now. Enough.
No.
Yeah, enough about the royal family.
Go on.
Can you name the 5 pledges, Iain?
Stop the boats.
Yeah.
Halve inflation. Get the waiting list down.
Yeah.
Grow taller.
Ooh. Oh no! See, now you've just disgraced yourself.
Even I don't do
personal comments.
Even I fight shy of height gags.
No, that's about as realistic as his other ambitions.
Okay. Oh, I see.
I don't know what the
nice get out. Grow the economy.
Yeah.
And
because everyone disagrees with that.
Cut debt.
Yeah. That's not going very well either.
Well, none of them are really.
That was one of my favourite moments of this year when I had what was his name? Greg Hands, who was then Tory party chairman. Never interviewed him before. And he was going on about the wonderful 5 pledges. So I said, should we see how they're going, Greg? And I went through them one by one. Luckily, I could remember them on that. And I said, well, that's not going very well. Well, this isn't going very well. I really felt sorry for the guy at the end of it.
What did he do?
Well, he just collapsed, really. He couldn't defend it because there was nothing to defend.
It was such an odd thing to do, Shill, to set up targets that you were either unlikely to hit, or in the event of hitting them, other people would point out that had more to do with gravity than any particular input from you politically.
It might explain why he's been flirting in Rome with Giorgia Meloni.
That was very unpleasant.
She's a fine-looking lady.
You can't go looking. Stop objectifying.
If she can talk about his height,
stop objectifying.
The point I was making about the height was the unreality of the ambition.
You meant to stop the sun coming up tomorrow. Respect. You might have said.
Yes, I could have said.
Well,
inflation has been halved, but then again,
it had nothing to do with him.
Well, if you claim credit for that, then you have to say, well, it's our fault it went up in the first place,
exactly.
which it wasn't to a large extent, not wholly, but to a large extent. So, I mean, I think it's a good thing that politicians make pledges, but they've got to be meaningful ones. I mean, grow the economy.
And achievable.
And also to have a divided line between you and the opposition, because otherwise people just see you as all the same.
What was on the headstone? Was that pledges? Do you remember that?
It was.
Yeah.
Where is it now? It was found this year, wasn't it? It was found somewhere this year.
A garage in South London, apparently.
The garden centre in Maidenhead, I thought. It's been turned into a water feature.
Oh, Lord. Oh, Lordy Lord. Yeah, the pledges thing and the politics of it all. This, I don't know about you, but on my programme almost every day, the cost of living is what comes through, and the various issues that people are facing. For some, it will be just strictly, mortgage related, and they won't be dealing with real poverty, but the mortgage has got worse and they're having to put in extra hours, that kind of thing. But for others, it is real grinding poverty, or people pushed into poverty for the first time, and it's been a tough
But do you feel that you don't hear from those people as much as those who are struggling to make ends meet? But you don't, unless you have a very, very specific phone in, you don't necessarily get those people phoning in.
Those people being
the ones right at the bottom who just can't afford anything.
I think I do.
I had a few people sleeping in their car this year.
Yeah.
I had calls from people sleeping in their car. I don't know, because we've been doing this for quite a long time now, and I don't know whether the salience of stopping the boats is anything like as high as the Tory party seem to be betting their house on it.
No, I don't.
No, it's not. They've lost the ear of big chunks of voters.
Yeah.
And now they're deciding which voting groups, if you can call it that clumsily, are still listening to us. What do they want to hear? We better say to keep them.
What they're doing is running a core vote strategy, and that they believe that their core voters care about stop the boats to the exclusion of virtually everything else. Now, I still think that's a misjudgment. That's what they believe. They must have some evidence for it, though.
Well, you say that.
Well, they do focus groups and polls all the time, so there must be some reason that they're doing it. But it strikes me that they've given up, so therefore they are adopting a strategy. Well, let's lose the fewest seats possible, and we think we can keep hold of a few if we do this.
Because that keeps votes from seeping out to whatever the Faragist organisation is
and
called.
It's a really cynical strategy.
Yeah, but I'm still not sure it's a very clever one, or that it is supported by much evidence.
Do you know what it is? It's a strategy of despair. I think the despair, not always that, and our job on the radio is not to make people feel hopeless or despair. You listen if they do, but you have to offer something as well, don't you? But I think there was a great piece in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago from John Harris, who I think more than most, possibly more than any journalist that I've been reading anyway, over the last few years, has followed the truth and the reality, the human truth and reality of what austerity has done to communities across this country. But John's piece that I read recently, he wrote as a result of being turfed off or not being able to get onto a train that was cancelled, he ends up getting a train to Reading that goes via a kind of leafy commuter route, Waterloo to Reading, that he wouldn't normally take, the Ascot, Winnersh, Richmond, the kind of seats that they're trying to hold on to or win back in the case of Richmond. And he makes the point that the failings and the shabbiness and the stuff that's not working has come home to roost in the shiniest of boroughs. And that's true.
I think that is true. And I feel this, I don't know whether you two do, but virtually every public service in this country that you use on a day-to-day basis, in some ways, doesn't quite work. There are some that are worse than others. But then again, I think everybody's experience is guided by what they've been through. I mean, the health service, we've probably talked about that more this year than any other year. I mean, as you know, I've had my issues this year, so I was in hospital for nearly a week and had lots of dealings with the health service. And all my dealings have been positive. There's nothing apart from the hospital food that I could complain about. And yet the experience of so many other people is very different to that. So I make my own judgments based on my own experience, but then I listen to callers who tell me something completely different, and I realise how lucky I was.
Yeah, and we do. And I suppose one of the privileges of our jobs, if we listen carefully enough, is that we don't just judge things based on our own experience. And of course, we all speak to other people that we know, friends, relatives, colleagues, whatever. But it's that waiting list, not whether you necessarily have a nice nurse or a good experience when you go, but that waiting list is vast. And it is, people will be dying because of it. I know people don't like me saying that, but it is true. People are dying because of that waiting list. I have a family member whose life is being threatened by that waiting list. I have another family member whose life is uncomfortable because of that waiting list. A relatively simple procedure that should be happening, and it's and it's just wait. And that, again, we were talking there about whether immigration is going to be the big thing. People see this. They see their colleagues suffering, or they see their colleagues disappear from the workplace because they can't get that operation, or for whatever reason they disappear. And it's a massive issue. Even if Labour win, they know they've got a massive job on their hands there.
Yeah, and you see, just before Christmas, Wes Streeting was saying, well, don't you think we're going to spend much more? Because we're not. Because the money has got to come from other good causes. And I'm not going to nick money from the education budget. And you think, well, Wes, if you really want to reform the health service, it will take money. I mean, it's not all about money, but if you want to introduce meaningful reforms, there will have to be some more money. So, I mean, I suspect if Labour win the next election, say it's in May, if we convene here...
Do you think it will be in May?
Should we come on to that in a second?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think that is quite an interesting discussion. Let's say it's in May, and we reconvene here in a year's time on Boxing Day. I think already there will be people saying, well, we might as well have voted for the Tories because there's been no difference, without people thinking, well, public sector reform is like turning around an oil tanker.
Time, yeah.
Tony Blair said this when he was trying to do it, and he was probably more successful than most in achieving it. But I think it's all very well in under-promising and over-delivering, but under-promising and under-delivering, I think, is going to be a real problem for Labour if they win the election.
Need to come out of the blocks at 100 miles an hour, and it's hard to know in what direction they would be. I think they could come to a fairly early settlement with the rail unions, actually. I think they could probably affect even if you just brought them to a place where they were no longer working to rule, a lot of the problems that you encounter.
Left now, isn't it? The RMT, that's settled. So, but they're the drivers. So
and maybe
drivers,
it's quite crucial, yeah.
But maybe if it is May, and again we can talk about that, the junior doctors, that's still not resolved as we speak, so maybe that's going to be down to Wes Streeting or whoever has the health brief.
Touch on just on front pages, because the two things have struck me this year. One is that the right-wing newspapers have not succeeded in demonising strikers in the way that they have in every other round of industrial action I can remember in the 20 years I've been doing this job. And the second was, to go back to the boats, the one place, this is where I'm not sure about focus groups in, because the one place where the feeling seems to be shared with the government's sense that this is the single most important issue facing the country. The only place I see that being reflected is on the front pages of the Daily Mail, the Daily Express and the Daily Telegraph. The newspapers are having quite a tough time of it at the moment, or an interesting time.
Well, I think newspapers are generally having a tough time. Most people are not buying newspapers in the numbers they used to. I certainly don't. I like reading a physical newspaper.
Same.
But I used to buy virtually all the papers on a Sunday. I now buy two.
Yes.
So I think financially they're having a difficult time. To be fair, the Times and the Telegraph and they have got a huge subscriber base now, so they're making money online in a way that they weren't 2 or 3 years ago. But it's a huge time of change, and I wonder, within the next 5 years, and I know people probably said this 5 years ago, if we are still going to have the number of national newspapers that we have in this country, because I don't think there are many countries in the world that do.
Well, Prince Harry might see a few off if he carries on his current path.
I was going to ask you, given the content of your book, another plug, given the or part of the content of your book focuses on the newspapers, why are they so powerful, and will they remain this powerful?
I think there's lots of answers to that question. some of which I don't know. I find it mystifying. I think that if you're doing a certain type of job, you the only place you can go to get a daily scorecard or a daily results is the newspapers. You know, they will turn to them. If you read what Cummings had to say about Johnson's relationship with the Mail and particularly the Telegraph, it was literally a sort of intravenous drip of either approval or disapproval. So I think politicians set far too much store by them, and then that sets the tone for the rest of the population. We still follow the newspaper's leads, and really we should probably be casting our net a lot wider.
So, James, I'm going to ask you, what stood out for you this year?
Well, it depends what you want. The story that I thought was most interesting to report live on air was the Daniel Khalif, the escaped prisoner. I thought that was an extraordinary saga with pretty much everything you could hope for, because no one got hurt, and yet it had this amazing jeopardy to it and an amazing subtext to it. I've enjoyed all the resignations, especially the one that wasn't a resignation, when Nadine decided that she was going to quit the Commons with immediate effect, and then sort of hung around for another 2 months for reasons that have never become entirely clear.
And there was another one that became a resignation, wasn't there? The sacking of Suella Braverman became a resignation.
Yes, she got sacked and then gave a resignation statement, which is quite a... Nadeem Zahawi got sacked, didn't he, at one point?
He did.
Dominic Raab got sacked. Well, he kind of resigned because he'd said he would resign in the event of him being found guilty of the thing he said he wasn't guilty of. So that was unfortunate, and we're almost certainly missing a few out. But the politics has been fun, the comings and goings, and as I say, that we think we saw him, you know, Daniel Khalif.
Really?
Yeah. So because he was in...
Did you ring the police?
We walked...
Because it's out your way, wasn't he?
And where he was found on the canal, my daughter and I were walking the dog, and we got to the place where we stopped for a bacon sandwich up near in Boston Manor Park. And I showed her the story on the phone because she asked me about it, and I showed her the story, and she said, "I'm not being funny, Dad, but I think I just saw him sitting on a bench down by the canal," and I thought she was joking. And then he was found later that day, about 1.5 miles from the bench on which...
So you didn't ring the police?
On the bench. No, because I thought she was joking. Because I laughed. She said, "I think I just saw him sitting on a bench," and I went, "A good one."
Women not being listened
and
to.
It wasn't
Starts
women
early.
not being listened to.
Starts early.
It just didn't cross my mind. And then when the news broke, she said, "I told you." I said, "I thought you were joking." And she said, "Well, I wasn't sure, but I mean, the chances are that we did actually..."
You just denied your daughter a bravery award.
She could have. Well, I don't know if she'd have got a bravery award, but she could have. She could have got a reward, an actual cash reward.
The Inspector Poirot Award for observation skills.
That was an odd story, though, wasn't it?
Yes.
Because, again, it was written up as another sign that our public services are crumbling, the prisons are all over the place. And I then looked up how many prison escapes there have been recently. I mean, if we go back to 2017...
Barely any.
How many prison escapes do you think there have been?
5.
4.
Damn.
And I'm thinking... Well, that's actually a really good thing, isn't it? I would have thought it had been at least 20 or 50 or something.
Yeah, although there is that, you do remind me slightly of that. Is it the Day-to-Day sketch with the swimming pool guard who goes, 1983, nobody died. 1984, nobody died. 1985, one person died. 1986, no. So ideally, no one should escape from prison. But I take your point.
I know what you mean. But one thing I did find out, I had a prison officer ring in. And this is the brilliant thing about our audience, isn't it?
You get
first-hand experience. This guy said, you do realise that on the gates of that prison, there'll be no one that's been trained. They recruit people and they immediately put them on the gate. They're not even interviewed face-to-face. It's all done online. You think, well, is it any wonder that this sort of thing happens then?
Have you ever been in a prison?
Yes.
Care to share?
As a visitor.
to an inmate.
I used to do a little bit of work with a restorative justice charity, and I went to the prison to give some awards to other people. They hosted it in a restaurant at a prison that was staffed entirely by prisoners, but I didn't walk the landings or sit in a cell or anything like that.
I've been to 2 prisons, Shepton Mallet, which is one of those really old-fashioned prisons.
Victorian.
Yeah,
prison,
I mean, a horrible, horrible place to visit somebody who was in for murder, who wanted to write a book about it. I didn't agree to do it in the end. And then I visited a friend in prison in Lincoln, and that was quite an experience because...
Anyone we know?
No, I'm not going to say who it is. It wasn't actually a close friend. It was somebody who had been involved in politics, not an MP, ex-MP or anything. and I didn't think he should have been in prison.
Right.
But the fact that I drove up to Lincoln just to spend half an hour visiting him, I think meant a huge amount to him.
I'm sure.
Given that I wasn't a close friend. And you do sort of sit there thinking, well, there but for the grace of God.
Well, it's funny you should say that you didn't think he should be in there, because whenever we talk about prison issues, you get great calls from prison officers or ex-prison officers, but former prisoners are fascinating as well, because they're not what you're necessarily expecting, are they? You know, there's a whole range of people who end up in prison.
We keep trying to persuade the Ministry of Justice to let us do a programme live from a prison, and they get very enthusiastic, and then they start ghosting.
Are you playing footsie with me under there? I keep thinking you're trying to give me a message.
Maybe I was.
Oh, please. Oh. What do you mean they start? You mean they just get panicked and they just change their mind?
Somebody in the system says,
no, this is a terrible idea.
Well, imagine if Johnny Cash.
What if you were taken hostage though, or something like that? It would be
very exciting, wouldn't it?
No, you can't
terrible.
say that.
I mean, I know this is a really weird
thing. End up on the roof throwing slates.
I've always wanted to have the prison experience. I mean, I obviously don't want to be put in prison.
You didn't go to public school, did you?
This is getting weird.
I didn't.
This is getting weird.
It is getting weird.
Go on.
But do you know what I mean?
No, I don't.
I mean, what?
Elaborate.
When you get sent down from the dock and then you're processed and you arrive at the prison and you get given your prison clothes, and that first night in the cell.
What must it feel
You're looking
like?
at me as if I'm a complete
No,
and
I'm
utter
not.
nutter.
I'm genuinely interested as to why you think it would be anything you'd ever want to do.
Well, I wouldn't really want to do it.
But you wonder what
if you really wanted to do it, it's not that hard to arrange, is it? But I think I understand what you mean. You mean to have that purity of feeling and to find out what that feeling feels like, that abject terror, that waking up the next morning. I do. When Jonathan Aitken went to prison, he said that Eton had been a very good preparation for it, and I think he was only half joking, actually. I think the privations of public schools in that era, the era where I was just at the back end of that era, it was still pretty grim when I got there, and you would get into an awful lot of trouble if you fled the grounds, if you escaped and stuff like that, but not quite the same, perhaps.
I spent a day in Wakefield prison once as a reporter. And I had a call from the prison officer the night before that was going to be my guide while I was there. And he said, what are you planning to wear tomorrow? And I said, I hadn't thought about it. And he said, have you got a dull-coloured coat that goes right to your neck and down to your ankles? I said, sort of. It was a dry as a bone coat. Horse riding coat. And he said, wear that. And I was going, oh, God, you know. But he was with me the whole time. And it was a fascinating day. I mean, it was slightly nerve-wracking sometimes because it's a Category A prison. So it's where the paedophiles and murderers are. And but it was so fascinating. And that thing that you alluded to there about having that moment of having your freedom removed, because I was interviewing some prisoners about... I was there because the usual Daily Mail headlines, presumably, about prison being an easy ride, la la la. And I spoke to a handful of prisoners together, and all of them were incredibly eloquent about what it means to have your freedom. Not just your freedom generally, but your freedom to decide anything taken away from you. And they were incredibly eloquent about that.
And when you get ex-prisoners phoning in, and whenever I do a prison reform phone-in, I purposely ask them to phone in. And they're almost always some of the best callers you ever get because they've got their lived experience of it.
Yeah. Of having gone the wrong way and paid for it. Yeah.
Anyway, should we have a little chat about Nadine Dorris, because I know it's one of James's favourite subjects.
No, one of my favourite authors.
Favourite author?
Yes.
Well, that was kind of why, because I've actually read her book. Have you, Sheila?
I haven't, no.
And
Has Nadine Dorris read her book?
Remind me what it's called.
It's called The Plot. And it's all about the overthrow, in inverted commas, of Boris Johnson. And she has this thesis, which she uses all of her interviews and research to then prove. And admittedly, I think she goes over the top in some of her interpretations of these things.
Nadine Dorris?
But it is actually a rather well-written book, and it's quite gripping in a way. And because I know a lot of the characters involved, and I was at university with some of them, in the
I thought they all had code names. Do they have real names as well?
Well, some of them have code. Well, one of them has a code.
Only what? Okay.
Yeah, which is obviously Dougie Smith, who...
no, but the woman she met in the pub where all the politicos go, she had a code name as well.
She's named somebody.
She had a clandestine meeting in the most popular pub in Westminster. It was a top secret. I don't think anyone was there. I think an awful lot of it has come from her own imagination.
No, I genuinely don't think that's the truth. I think she did interview all these people. I think she has sort of overinterpreted some of the things that they've said. But if only half of it is true, it is absolutely horrifying how such a small cabal of people can have such an influence over the Prime Minister of this country. Now, in the end, you do finish the book having a little bit more sympathy with Boris Johnson than you had before, but then you think to yourself, but he...
How do you feel about that, James?
Stop it. But then you think to yourself, but he was Prime Minister. He appointed all of these people. Yes. So in the end, he's only got himself to blame, something that she can't see. But it's worth a read, honestly.
Yeah, I'll wait for the audio book. Does she read it herself?
No.
Oh, well, that's a missed opportunity.
Can I share something nice about Nadine Dorries? It might kill you, James, but I'm going to
No, actually, before you do, civil servants I've met say that she's very nice to them.
Okay.
Which is, you should she called me a terrorist sympathiser and libelled me on a level that would be absolutely actionable if she hadn't done it under parliamentary privilege. So, swings and roundabouts.
Yeah.
I don't think you needed to point that out.
No, I know. I felt the need to support him.
Thank you for supporting the contention that I'm not a terrorist sympathiser.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the nice thing I want to share about Nadine Dorries, in the spirit of Christmas joy, is that when, it would have been about 10 years ago now, when my mum had fairly major heart surgery in her early 80s. Yeah, early 80s. Out of nowhere, and I think it was because you had a conversation with her, out of nowhere she DM'd me to tell me that her own mum had had the very same operation, what to expect from intensive care, not to worry too much. And she was just, sorry, I'm not crying, my throat's just gone. Bit of water, I think. But she was very, very caring, and I needed it at the time, and it came at the right time, and that was very human. And it's important to remember that some of the people who annoy us the most in our lives, in our politics and everything, I've got a couple. She isn't one of them in my case, but I've got a few politicians who have tested my patience over the last few years. But it's important to remember they're human.
Well, this is why I don't like meeting them. Actually, this is why I genuinely don't like meeting politicians, because your natural humanity reaches out to them. You see them as human beings, and then you hold back a little bit when you should be giving them the kicking.
You
see, I do.
I think I found that quite difficult when I first came to LBC. Interviewing people that I knew and were friends, I found quite a challenge. I don't anymore. They know that I've got a job to do. I know they've got a job to do. But having come from that side of the fence,
kind of thing,
I can get myself into their heads, I think, in a way that maybe others find it more difficult.
Yeah.
And let's muse over some foreign policy issues. I mean, it's always tempting to pick the thing that's in the news at the moment, but the Israel-Gaza war, I think, if we look back in 10 years' time, will probably be seen as the big issue of 2024. I don't know what effect it's had on you, but I found some of the callers incredible. I found some of them disgusting. For the first time in 13 years, I cover the text and tweet screen because I don't want to read the vitriol that's coming into the studio while I'm on air. Never done that before. And I found some of it profoundly upsetting to the extent that I remember we did an hour on from the river to the sea. And I found myself on the train home crying.
The chant and what it means, you mean?
Yeah. And I don't remember something like that having that effect on me before. Now, if you think, well, it's all very well being self-indulgent, but the effect that it's having on people in the region, I mean, that's what we all have to think about. But it's one where it's quite difficult to maintain any sort of semblance of impartiality, I've found.
I haven't found quite that, but I've found it as difficult as you described as well, or as affecting as you described to cover. James, how have you found it?
I don't know. I know what you both mean, but it's not. It's you can't be consistent. So I don't know if impartiality is quite the right word. So for the first week after the terror attacks, you could be unstinting in your condemnation of Hamas, and that meant that many people who are closely allied with the interests of Israel, and I'm more interested in Jewish people who need the protection, the existential protection from centuries of persecution and pogroms than I am in opportunistic right-wing politicians who support Israel come rain or shine for rather different and possibly more sinister reasons. And they thought you were wonderful.
Questioning way.
Yeah, and they thought you were wonderful because you were talking in a But then by about the 13th or the 14th, the fears that Israel's response was going to go, for want of a better phrase, too far, or was going to go to places that you couldn't support and you couldn't be comfortable with. As soon as you started to articulate that thought, the pendulum swung. And people who'd been condemning you for the previous week by saying, but what about this and what about that, were now saying, oh, thank you for reflecting the unfairness of the current situation. And the people who'd been praising you or thanking you in the previous week suddenly accused you. And the ones that stick in my mind, oddly, I'm probably a tiny bit more thick-skinned than you are now, but only because I've done it more over the years. The ones that stick in my mind are the ones that really highlight how much trouble people have got themselves into. So the viciousness, I think, is now par for the course. It's horrible and it can be very hurtful, but I price it in. I know that it's coming.
The viciousness on some calls, you mean?
Yeah, not so much the calls. Just some of the calls, when you hear what's behind the words sometimes that they won't say. But as Iain says, the text and the tweets in particular. Yeah. But when it highlights the difficulties that people have got themselves into, so you see an exchange between people and you're tagged into it, and it says something like, he was so balanced for the first week, I don't know what's gone wrong, maybe they've got to him. And I'm saying I wasn't balanced in the first week. I was
reacting to a particular story,
completely critical of the terrorist atrocity that was undertaken. And now I'm being critical of some of the excess of Israel.
And also, if you nail your colours to the mast, which I did in the first week in quite a trenchant way, when you then do criticise Netanyahu or you criticise something that the IDF might have done, people don't hear it because they've already pigeonholed you as being totally pro-Israel and unable to see it. Yeah. And one other thing, I remember the night I was on air when a rocket or whatever hit the hospital. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to automatically say this was Israel.
No.
And I had a very uncomfortable couple of hours.
That was while you were on air.
Basically saying, well, we don't know. We can't. We might think that, but you don't know it. So let's just be a little bit careful.
And a pylon ensued.
Typical. Siding with Israel.
I had the same experience.
And I was right.
I had the same experience about that particular
unlike
incident.
The BBC, I have to say, who automatically assumed it was Israel.
Yeah.
I had the same experience, not on air, obviously, because I wasn't on air at the time, but I tweeted, please remember, the Gaza Health Ministry is the Hamas.
You did.
Ministry.
I saw that.
Remember, and I'm sure you saw the reactions to it as well. It's not the single moment that's the reason I came off Twitter. I'm still on it to view it. For now, I'm not contributing to it. I'll retweet things that I think are of interest about anything, not necessarily about Israel, but I will retweet stuff about Israel and Gaza. But I actually found, both on air and on social media, I just came to the conclusion fairly quickly, probably by the end of the second week, where I just thought, right, I'm not doing this. I am not engaging with the disengaged. And if somebody thinks that they can have a conversation, if somebody wants a conversation with me about this whole horrible story, whether it's October the 7th or what's flowed from October the 7th, they better try and do it intelligently, because if they don't, I'm not letting them play. Because it's too
but the trouble
grievous a situation for people to be that.
But there are some very skilled propagandists. I think actually on both sides, to be fair. But I will never forget. There's only a couple of weeks ago, Abdullah from Leicester phoned in, very articulate, well spoken, and was trying to convince me that the IDF had killed all the people on the 7th of October.
Yeah.
And he said, but it's in Haaretz, the Israeli, well-respected Israeli newspaper.
Yeah, I had to read Haaretz, man.
I'm thinking, hang on a minute. But he got to the point where he made me doubt myself.
Yeah.
And I then
it wasn't in Haaretz.
And I then spent the next half an hour Googling it all.
Yes,
and
exactly.
At the end of the hour, I just said, do you remember Abdullah from Leicester? Yeah. He was talking Grolix.
Yes, exactly that. And of course, I'd be possibly the best way of highlighting what we're all trying to articulate, Sheila, is that when you do that and you make a conscious decision not to get involved, not to tweet, not to engage, or I've made the decision I'll leave it all on air. I won't take much. I might retweet a clip of me being on air, but I'm not getting involved in this. I'm not replying to anything.
That's wise.
Then you get the tweet saying, I notice you haven't commented on. Said you go, you got me banged to rights. I don't care about
because we handed her arse.
I know you've got me. I don't care about dead children because I haven't tweeted about how awful it is.
You know what? Me too. Apparently on social media, there's a woman. I won't say her name, but she claims to be a woman. I don't know what's going on Twitter. It could be a bot. I don't know.
That's very true.
But she she said, I think she was a real person actually, because she tweeted in response to somebody else putting something out about me. She tweeted, not just that, responding to this person's tweet. She said, not just that, Sheila literally said on air. Imagine me saying this on air. Sheila literally said on air, frankly, I don't think Israel are killing enough Palestinian children. Yeah. I calmly messaged this woman and said, that was off Twitter by this point. I just I couldn't DM her. So I just said, so-and-so, would you follow me so I can DM you about your previous comment? And I said, if you don't follow me, this is where I get threatening, Scouser. If you don't follow me, I'll just have to make my point in public. But I'm giving you the chance for you and I to make it in private. Yeah. She didn't follow me. So I then messaged her and say, about 2 days later, and I said, still no reply. I noticed, don't want to engage anymore with me about this, despite what you just said. I said, I'd really encourage you to do so or to remove it. Because it's very serious defamation. And I said, and incredibly irresponsible given what's happening in the world. And off she went, and she did. She deleted it. She took it down, and I just said, much appreciated. Thank you.
But that means she is real. That means she is a real person.
Okay. Let's move on to one or two other foreign issues.
Well, I was about to say, I think that in years to come, Ukraine will probably be more significant than this, because this is cyclical, whereas Ukraine, the invasion of Crimea notwithstanding, but the world order is much more threatened by what's happening there than by what's happening in the Middle East.
And Europe defining, as in...
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And also, I think the media in general has let itself down over Ukraine since October the 7th, in that it's hardly got any coverage at all. I've done a couple of phone-ins on it, but I feel that I've let people down by not doing enough. It's a bit like 1956 when the Suez Crisis happened and the Soviets used the excuse...
Were you broadcasting then?
No. Used the excuse to invade Hungary. Yeah. No one really made anything of it. And exactly the same thing is happening here. And I think the Ukrainians are now in a situation where they realise that the world is looking elsewhere, and Zelensky appearing in Washington just before Christmas was almost an act of desperation.
Yeah, it was. And you got the votes in the US and the antagonism against the spending. It's starting to... There's noises like that being made here as well, aren't there? Not quite as loudly.
Not really.
Not politically at the top. I'm hearing it.
I think in some European capitals it is starting. Yes. It hasn't started here yet, but it probably will at some point. And it just shows you...
I'm talking more about calls to the programme.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah. I think it shows what a short attention span we now have on anything. Yeah. And it's a great shame, because if Putin does prevail in Ukraine, well, woe betide some other states that surround his borders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then the instability, as you say, not just the distraction, not just the drawing of attention, but the instability that it speaks to as well plays into Putin's hands.
This is LBC's Christmas special with James O'Brien, Iain Dale and me, Shelagh Fogarty. I hope you enjoyed the first part. Coming up, it's a big election year next year, don't you know? And not just for the UK. So we will be going through the main election issues and what it means for all of us. Don't forget to listen to part 2, which you'll find in the same place you're listening to this. Bye-bye.
This is a Global Player original podcast.
Hello, I'm Shelagh Fogarty, popping up in the whole show podcast feed, but I think you might enjoy this, certainly hope so, our LBC Christmas special. Quite a year, it always is, isn't it? Another unprecedented chapter in UK politics, and this is part 2, so let's get into it.
It's time to have a look at what 2024 might hold. It's going to be a huge election year, not just here and, of course, in America, but in plenty of other territories as well. So where all this might be going is anybody's guess, which is what we'll do next. Have a guess. When do you think it's going to be? Iain, go first.
I used to firmly believe it would be autumn, and I don't necessarily mean October, because the reason I don't think it'll be in October is because they'd have to cancel the party conferences, and for all the parties they're major money spinners. So I don't think it'll be October. If it is in the autumn, I think it'll be November. I mean, in theory, you could have in October, November, you could have, say, an October the 31st election here, You could have then the US election on November the 3rd. You could have an Irish election around the same time and an Australian one. Now, those two aren't set in stone, a bit like us. The Prime Ministers get the chance to choose the date. There is a school of thought it could be early December.
Right.
There is a school of thought it could be January, because if you're Prime Minister...
Are there any months you haven't mentioned now?
Well, I'm just giving the choices.
In this forensic analysis.
Are you a Scorpio?
No, I'm Cancer.
Could be February.
Sensitive and loyal.
It can't be
Can
February.
I throw something into the mix here?
He hasn't finished yet. Give him a chance.
No,
He's only got up to January.
Most unlikely. Well, two things. I think the election should have been called after the Truss fiasco, but that's a whole other story. That ship has sailed. I, like you, think it could easily be May.
By the way, I got a Christmas card from Liz Truss, which, given the terrible things I've said about her over the years, I was quite surprised at.
Did you get one?
What do you think?
No,
and it was
that.
One of these where she was sitting rather demurely in front of a fire.
Oh, no.
And I just thought, this is the best card I've ever had.
You should frame that.
And it was, even had a Dear Iain in there.
Right.
And I'm thinking, what's she after?
Airtime, mate, airtime.
Oh.
Don't give it to her.
Oh. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, but you keep doing this. Every time people have got into their stride, you bring up Anne Widdecombe, Andrea Leadsom, Nadine Dorries,
your lead,
or
James.
Liz Truss. Or Liz Truss.
As I was saying, ladies and gentlemen, should have been September 2020, whatever it was when she did that nonsense. I think it's going to be May. And one of the reasons I think it's going to be May is a little bird that I can't name told me that King Charles...
He's perked up now. He wants to know who the bird is.
...has a state trip to India in November of next year.
Ooh.
And that the king cannot be out of the country during a general election.
That's a thing, is it?
That's a thing.
Okay.
So I wonder whether that will sway the autumn, winter, spring
early December
months.
then.
Very interesting.
Early December then it would be. Why you didn't finish?
No, because the campaign would be in November, wouldn't it?
Yeah, of course it would. But he only has to be here surely for the ballot, not for the whole
I don't know.
shebang.
I'm not a constitutional expert.
Oh, that's interesting. What do you think? Because you were telling us...
Well,
yes.
I think...
It's
now
nonsense.
No, I should plagiarise that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
I should find out the facts and figures on all of that sort of thing.
Yes. Not from me.
I now believe that it could well be May. Because, well, for all sorts of different reasons. If you want to minimise your electoral casualties, hold it on the same day as everyone is going to go and vote anyway. So the turnout could be higher, which you could say might favour Labour. But in London, for example, I think it would favour the Conservatives. So they could hold on to a few seats in London that they might otherwise lose. I'm not sure that's necessarily the best reason to hold an election in May. That there were rumours that they were trying to bring the budget forward to February, which I don't think has ever happened before. Well, that indicates that they're thinking of May. I don't think they've made a decision.
No, I don't think they've made a decision either.
Well, that would be in keeping with the entire administration.
Historically, when things are going badly, you hang on for as long as you humanly can. When things are going this badly, you hang on for as long as you humanly can. And so did Gordon Brown.
For time to improve.
And it didn't.
Gordon Brown did the opposite, didn't he? Gordon Brown should have gone sooner because he was actually doing well, but his excess of caution meant he'd wait for even more positive
In 1979, after the election, James Callaghan said, there are some times in politics when you can't do anything to push back the tide. And this was one of them, and that's what he put his loss
and
to
this is one of them.
And I think the
97 was one of those as well, I think. So they may as well just get it over and done with, is what you're saying.
Yes.
In a sense.
I mean, there's always that hope that some big event could change things.
Like Galtieri invading the Falkland Islands.
Well, they don't deserve a big event.
That didn't actually.
They don't.
Thatcher would have won anyway. And I think people have just thought. I mean, all elections are either about the hopey changey thing, as Sarah Palin used to say, or stick with nurse for fear of worse. Well, why would people want to stick with nurse for fear of worse? No. Do they really think that Starmer, Reeves, Streeting, etc., could be more incompetent than this government has been? And I mean, I hate saying that because they're my tribe.
Yes.
But when even somebody like me is thinking, well, how can I vote for them next time?
Yes.
You realise how much trouble they're in.
Do you still identify as a Conservative?
Well, yeah, it's just a shame the Conservative Party doesn't.
No, I didn't leave them, they left me.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I never say that because I think it's such a trite and stupid thing to say.
Remind me who said that.
I can't remember.
Somebody did say it.
Yeah,
I'm sure they must have done. But it's very difficult because where have people like me got to go? I'm not going to go to Reform UK.
No, I'm very glad to hear it.
I'm not going to go to the Liberal Democrats. I've never voted Labour and don't think I ever could.
Really?
No. So what do? Vote Green and protest?
Do you know, in the words of Penny Mordaunt, stay and fight.
Stay.
Fight.
Stay. Fight.
Again,
Fight.
to save
I can't believe you've never seen this. This is excellent. How could you have missed it? You're normally all over that
Maybe it was
kind
when
of
you
thing.
had your leg.
Oh, maybe you were.
issue.
It was during your confinement.
You were in hospital with
It was during his confinement. He was off his face on all
I did
sorts
love
of
a bit of morphine, I'll tell you.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay, so we're all you're both saying May, and I'm in the very rare position for me of saying openly stating I have not got a Scooby.
No, I don't either. I think mine is entirely wishful thinking.
Right.
The sooner the better.
Are you looking forward to an election?
I am. Yes, I wasn't for a while. I felt a bit sick at the thought of it for a while.
Elections to me are
because
like
of all the
Christmas.
lying.
I just love elections.
No, but I'm
This
ready now.
one-
I'm ready now.
This one I think is going to be ghastly in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah.
And we've already seen it. I mean, in the papers last weekend, they were saying about the Tories have got this dossier on Keir Starmer, friend of the terrorist, a bit like you, James. And
Savour of dogs.
by the way, for anybody who wasn't listening to this,
No, leave it. Just see what happens.
I just think it's going to be horrible.
The Starmer stuff is interesting, isn't it? Because as I understand it, you have a cab rank rule when you're a barrister. So the cases that he fought would normally have been handed to him by Buggins' turn, and the Tories again are going to take their potential supporters as being very, very stupid, as in they won't put in the effort,
of nonsense.
banking on a few people, perhaps in our line of work, to inflate the nonsense and to peddle the basic lies. They're banking on people not actually understanding how barristers work, and that's the biggest thing they've got to hit them with, hit him with.
Did it shock you this year, though, that advertising campaign that Labour did, sort of basically Rishi Sunak is the friend of paedophiles? I was genuinely profoundly shocked by that.
Was it an advertising campaign, or was it just a Twitter thing?
It was.
Was it on billboards?
It was an internet thing.
Yeah, okay. Because I think there's a difference. I think there's probably the chain of. I thought it was pathetic.
There isn't. I wasn't impressed with it. No,
I thought it was pathetic.
It was just.
Also, they didn't need to do it.
And it gave the Tories license to hit back in any way they want.
They should not have done that.
Can I ask
you're right.
When you say you think it's going to be dreadful,
Yeah.
I do too, which is why I felt sick until recently. I just thought the thing that was bothering me the most was I'm going to have to wade through so many lies, and not just claim and counterclaim and differences of opinion and colourful politics.
I'm not sure
I get.
That's not that different. If you think back to 2019, we had the 40 hospitals.
Oh yeah.
And there were various things that
2019 was awful.
And I
thinking
remember
2019.
calling them out, saying, "Well, this is not true."
Yes.
And I think we have to do that,
Yeah, we do.
even if it goes against
Your loyalty.
the people that we want to win.
So your nervousness.
Who do you
is
want
what?
to win?
I don't want anybody. I mean, it sounds.
I don't want
awful,
anybody to win.
and this is where.
Do you want me to be Prime Minister?
Do you know? I wouldn't object to that.
What if you get the casting
As
vote?
long as I could be foreign.
What if you get the casting vote? What if it's dead? What if it's a dead heat and you get the casting vote?
As Theresa May said to me in that memorable
Oh.
interview, that's a hypothetical question.
It is a hypothetical question, but hypothetical questions are good.
They are.
You want?
Look, cards on table.
Yeah.
When Boris Johnson and Liz Truss went, I genuinely thought that competence was going to return.
Yes, I did.
And it hasn't.
For 3 hours, I did.
I mean, it has.
Genuine.
It has in
I'm not
some
being glib.
ways, but then they do things like appointing Suella Braverman, for example.
Yeah.
Twice.
And then sort of the policies on immigration, which are just evil.
Yes.
And I mean, people think so the older I get, the more left wing I get. It's not that I get left wing.
You big trot.
It's the
You've
fact.
stayed where you always were.
It's the fact that I want competent government.
Yes.
I'm never going to agree 100% with my own party. Margaret Thatcher never agreed 100% with her own government, but I want to agree with 70 or 80%, and at the moment it's more like 30 or 40.
You didn't feel that abolishing the 7 bins was a big breakthrough moment?
Apparently there are some councils that have 7 bins. I mean,
not anymore, they're not.
The thing with those sorts of stories, there is always an element
of course there is.
that they can cling on to.
No, of course there is, but it doesn't stop them looking and sounding ridiculous. You still haven't answered my question, if you had the casting vote.
Of which party wins?
Yeah.
They're all shouting. Come on!
It's a complete dead heat.
Well,
you can say it.
They come to you. You are the white smoke.
I think, in all honesty, now I would probably give my casting vote to Rachel Reeves.
Okay, that's the first. No, that's a good answer. It's a slight.
I genuinely think that Labour have some really good people. I think Wes Streeting is a first-class politician. I think Rachel is.
And this, of course, is the kiss of death for them from Jeremy Corbyn admirers.
Starmer, I'm not wholly convinced by. And I think there isn't enough depth in their shadow cabinet. And I think I think they need to bring back some sort of old hands.
Well, that's just,
which they've started doing.
That's chronological, isn't it? That's just the absence of the time that they've been out of power.
Think back to Blair's shadow cabinet. We knew who most of them were.
That's very true. And they had a heft.
And they've been around a long time.
They had a heft.
See, I mean, Johnny Reynolds is somebody who hasn't got the most massive public profile. Their shadow business secretary. I think he's an absolutely first-class politician.
Well, that's
he
good.
Came out a couple of weeks ago. He launched a small business strategy, and there was a lot of meat to it. And you don't get that from most Labour front benches.
Not yet.
And I was really impressed by that, not least because he came and talked to me for an hour about it.
But he
did
doesn't have to do that, does he?
Interestingly, I spoke to Liz Kendall, DWP, and she shadowed DWP, just to be clear. The election hasn't happened yet. And similarly, she was quite muscular when we were talking about small business. So we just seen Iain sort of desperately try to find the words when we asked him.
Not good for broadcasting,
who
is it,
he
really?
wants for the good of the country to win the general election.
Yeah.
But it was revealing, I think, because I think not just about you, I think a lot of people feel this way. There is a real sort of shifting of sands going on in our politics at the moment. And it's very uncomfortable for a lot of people to know how they're going to vote.
You don't find, also to echo something Iain said, you don't find passionate Keir Starmer supporters on anything like the level that you would have found, for example, a passionate Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson supporter.
If you look at Keir Starmer's personal ratings at the moment, Rishi Sunak is -49, Starmer is -22. Before the 2010 election, David Cameron was +16.
Gosh.
Before the 1997 election, Tony Blair was +19. So anyone that thinks that Labour are automatically going to win a Blair-style landslide, I'm not sure that is possible if the leader isn't seen as popular as their party.
Because leaders matter.
They do matter. Elections. I mean, Tony Benn used to sort of say, it's issues, not personalities. Yeah. Well, it isn't, actually.
Was he Welsh?
Most people vote... I say most. A lot of people vote in a presidential way. They vote for the party whose leaders they like most.
And typically, he or she will be the person they see most in the lead up to the election.
Yes, the debates could be crucial then. I'm persuaded that
are there going to be any change?
Is that a possibility then?
Well, there weren't last time. Well, there were, but did Boris Johnson take part in any last time, or did he do one?
He did.
But it's entirely possible. I mean, I think it ought to be enshrined in law now. There ought to be, like in America, they have this commission on debates. We ought to have something similar, and I'll happily volunteer to chair it.
Do you think they should just wheel out Penny again with the sword?
Fight.
Yeah.
Is Sue Gray interesting in the context of what you were both saying, or what Iain was saying about the lack of heft and experience in the Labour machine, because she may
given her years in the civil service,
and given her reputation,
she's the Jonathan Powell figure in Keir Starmer's administration, and that Jonathan Powell had been in the Foreign Office. I think he was at the Washington Embassy, and Tony Blair then recruited him to be his chief of staff. So Starmer has used the Blair playbook yet again and recruited Sue Gray, who I know a little bit. I've always had a high regard for her. And I think it was a good appointment, obviously hugely controversial at the time, given the circs. But she doesn't suffer fools gladly. She's a real person. She's not a typical civil servant or ex-civil servant. And I think she will do a very good job for
What do you think the move by Starmer to get her tells us about him?
I think it shows that he recognised that maybe his team wasn't quite up to scratch. He's gone through a couple of chiefs of staff in a comparatively short time. But
did he realise? Do you think he will have realised it left him open to risk and her open to risk of being described as, doing the wrong thing constitutionally in a way?
And in a way, it was. Let's face it. It was the wrong thing constitutionally for her to do it in the way that she did.
To do what? To open negotiations for the job?
Well, I think when you are conducting an inquiry into the sitting Prime Minister, to start talking to the leader of the opposition about a job, it doesn't take Einstein to work out what the conflicts of interest are.
Clear that was the chronology.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, he was still Prime Minister when they were having the discussions.
Johnson was, but the report had been completed. See, this is.
No, I don't think it had been finished.
I do not.
No.
Because when we talk about controversy, that for me adds to the idea I expressed a moment ago about they throw it, but Starmer somehow, and some of it might stick, but he won't throw it back, because that was absurd to me. The Sue Gray report was simultaneously, for Boris Johnson fans, it was both a completely damp squib that exonerated him. I think that was the phrase on the front of the papers, damp squib. It's what Johnson called it. And simultaneously, it was a terrible conspiracy that unfairly undermined him and was malignantly motivated and designed to drive him out of office. So that's why it doesn't work, I think, with a lot of the public, because it can't be both of those
things. If anything,
it
criticises civil service more.
Yeah.
I don't think the public care about these sorts of appointments, frankly. And I remember saying at the time when her appointment was announced, I said, look, I know her. I've always regarded her. I've had dealings with her in my former life as a publisher, and some quite interesting sort of toing and froing where her role was to effectively censor ministerial memoirs.
Yeah.
But
I bet that's interesting.
She knew that I knew that she had no power to do so.
Right.
And that if I decided, as the publisher of the book, that I was going to go ahead and publish what I wanted, she couldn't stop me.
Are there no rules?
Well, there are conventions.
But that's all. What was the juiciest thing that you argued about?
Oh, it's all to do with Buckingham Palace.
Was it?
She would constantly say, the palace wouldn't like this.
Is that right?
So I don't really care.
We'll get you.
No, but she knew that I knew that she couldn't do anything about it.
The dealings.
Yeah, sort of conversations between a cabinet minister and the palace. And that was the sort of default. And I don't think I gave way on... I mean, in any normal book, she would make 50 requests.
Yeah.
And I would agree to 2 of them.
That's nice. I like that
for
ratio.
Example, you were already going to edit it anyway.
David Laws, in his book on the coalition, he described where the Cobra room was, and she said, well, that could be of interest to terrorists. And I thought, yeah, you're probably right. So I did take that out. Yeah. But most of the other things, it was just sort of political gossip that they wanted taken out.
I have a great Sue Gray story. Can I just share it with you? Yeah. I'm going to hoist by my own petard here. But anyway, do you remember there was that period where everything was suddenly about we'll wait for the Met report, we'll wait for the Sue Gray report. Yeah. And there was just this sense of, they're hiding it, or tantalisingly close to hearing it and couldn't get it. Well, during that time, I went to visit some friends who live in Dollis Hill. And I didn't know at the time that they are also friends with Sue Gray. I had no idea. And when I arrived, I was walking towards their front door. And as I was walking towards the front door, my friend was saying goodbye to a guest who had previously been in their house. And I think you probably guess who it is by this point. So I'm not ruining the story. I hope I'm not ruining the story anyway. So as she went past me, it was quite sort of just about turning dark. And as she went past me, it was cold, coat, hat, And I just said, no, she said, one in, one out. And I said, absolutely. And behind went in to my friends, had dinner with them, And towards the end of the evening, as we got to the glass of red wine with a bit of cheese phase.
So middle class.
So middle class, yeah. Would you like a cheesy pineapple one? Yeah. I said, sorry, my friend said, I'm telling this story very badly, I'm good at jokes, honest. My friend said...
It's going to be like a Ronnie Corbett monologue.
Stop.
Anyway. But my friend pointed out, we were talking about politics and we were talking about the Sue Gray report, and he said, you really didn't clock her on the way in, did you? And I said, who? And he said, that was Sue Gray you just walked past when you came into our house. And I said, I cannot believe you let her go without me.
This
grilling her.
Reminds me of my days as a newspaper journalist.
Missing the
I
story.
would routinely walk past big stories.
And I was like, come back. It was like the end of Titanic. Sue, come back.
Not even notice.
But anyway,
so
that was the big scoop I didn't get.
And she was absolutely the centre of attention at the time. She was the centre of everything.
Anyway, moving on.
Yes.
Did you see that appreciation for my story?
That's a cracker. It's the way you tell. It's the way you tell it. I don't have a Sue Gray story, so I feel bad now. No, I didn't have any dealings with her at all.
If they came, now I'm going to put you on the spot, James.
Oh.
If Keir Starmer rang you up one day and said, James, I need a heavyweight director of communications, would you take the job?
No, and I'm not being coy. I wouldn't be very good at it, partly for the reasons we've just alluded to. I'm very, very bad still at spotting stories. I can just about string a sentence together, but I wouldn't be able to...
on a good day.
On a good day, I wouldn't be able to give good advice on news management. And I don't have any particularly deep contacts or goodwill on Fleet Street. I mean, if there was any goodwill on Fleet Street, it's gone now with the new book. So there's no earthly way I could...
I think that's a very interesting way you've put it there, because I always had this theory, I don't know whether you agree with this, Sheila, that I only really knew myself when I got to 50. I knew what I was good at and I knew what I wasn't good at. And when... who was it that Theresa May got rid of as her director of communications? And there was this sort of story one afternoon. I kept getting phone calls saying, "Oh, hey, you're going to be the new number 10 director of comms." And it was either me or Robin Gibb. That would be a good appointment. Or Robbie Gibb.
How deep is your love?
And I just thought to myself, well, it's flattering to be associated with that. Yes. If they ever offered it, I would say no, because I know that I wouldn't be good at it.
Right.
I was asked, actually.
Were you?
I'm not going to say by which party.
Okay.
But between my time...
In the last 13 years, there's only been one.
No, you mean a big job in comms. You don't mean...
I don't mean government.
Oh, right, okay.
It was between my time at the BBC and my time here. And I had a call from a certain someone seeing if I wanted to join their comms team at a high level, and I said no for the very reason that you've just described. I know full well it is not where I would be best used, and it doesn't really appeal to me either.
No,
I think a lot of people do say yes to these kinds of jobs because they're flattered.
Yes,
they think of the long term. So, well, everybody else who's done this
has gone on to.
They get lots of money for their memoirs
and a knighthood.
They could then get a board on a big PR company.
You're in the room where it happens.
Exactly. But in the end, you've got to stick to your guns and think, well, would I be good at it?
Yes. If you'd asked me how I would feel about a seat in the House of Lords and responsibility for Leveson 2, I would have given you a very different answer.
You in the House of Lords.
Do you know what I'd do? I'd get all the robes and I'd go and sit outside Nadine Dorries' house for a fortnight.
That's stalking, mate.
In a mini metro. Yeah, all right, maybe not a fortnight.
But why not in the House? I mean, the House of Lords is a whole story of its own, isn't it? It has to be reduced.
I would literally kill to get in the House of Lords.
Literally, because then two of your dreams could come true. You could wake up in jail the next day.
Why, Delilah?
Well, because I'm never going to be an MP. But I think the House of Lords actually does do some really good work, and you can make a difference. You can do some great campaigns from the House of Lords. So I'm trying to persuade... though I haven't actually talked to her about it yet, because Jackie Smith wants to be in the House of Lords, my compatriot on the floor.
She probably has a slightly better chance than you, doesn't she?
She doesn't think she does.
Does she not?
The second you say it out loud, your chances are diminished.
Like the Groucho Marx School of Club.
Sue Gray would sort it, wouldn't she?
She could pull some strings.
Never met her.
I've spent time recently with
you have.
Martha Lane Fox and Rosie Boycott, who both do brilliant jobs in the House of Lords, but then I can't really, in all conscience, suggest that any of us deserve to be there if Martin Lewis still can't get himself a seat on the crossbenches, which is objectively absurd.
Don't get me started.
So we'll all be in the House of Lords by this time next year. That'll be an interesting new show.
Oh, Lord above, literally.
Three Lords are leaping.
See, now there would be an ethical dilemma. Keir Starmer rings out, sent out, Iain, we'd like to put you in the House of Lords and make you a junior transport minister, but you've got to publicly declare that you'd vote for us.
Yeah.
That would be an ethical.
You have to go to transport.
Like Rory Stewart.
I've always wanted to be a transport
minister.
Really?
we've had a proper look at what is likely to happen on the UK electoral landscape next year, but of course the American one could prove, well, at least as interesting and significantly more worrying, Shelagh.
Yeah, he might come back, mightn't he? The orange one. I do find that prospect genuinely scary because I think he's such a destabilising figure. And I found him very stressful to do business with first time round. I found him so alarming. And I found Melania utterly inexplicable, other than in the obvious way.
Sure. A transactional relationship, being the obvious way.
A Russian
in which to describe it.
Yeah. I just can't go. I can't do it twice. Don't make me do it twice.
You have a proper angst.
A small angst.
I do as well, because I've got no clue now, and we do this for a living. We generally, you'd think you'd get a bead on something. Usually, you can, you know when you're on form because you predict something and it happens a couple of days later. So the numbers suggest that he's doing very well. The complacency, the Democrat complacency was always Joe Biden is actually doing a good job. All of the statistical evidence supports the idea that he's done rather better than anybody could have reasonably expected on a whole host of fronts, and yet the numbers keep extending. The lead that Trump has over him in the polls keeps extending. And yet we had January the 6th when I presume we all sat there watching it thinking that's it now. There's no way that America stomachs a borderline armed insurrection upon the seat of power and then lets its architect return to respectability. But they did, and he is.
The only shard of light that I can see in this is that surely if he was found guilty of one of the different things that he's been charged with before the election, or was even imprisoned before the election, I think that's unlikely, but you never know.
It's not impossible.
Surely, I've been told that you can be president from a prison.
You can be, but surely the American public would not vote for somebody who was actually in prison, or would he just be able to use that, saying, "See, it's all a plot against me"?
You only have to look at the MAGA voters, the red-blooded MAGA voters, to know that the answer is yes, they would vote for him if he was in prison.
But that's not going to win him an election.
They'd treat him like he was Václav Havel.
But you see, I think that this side of the Atlantic, we and I've always thought that I understood the American side.
Yes, same.
And I read a lot about American politics. I know quite a bit about sort of the Republican Party in the past.
Yeah.
But the Republican Party today is not the Republican Party that I grew up with. It's become a quasi-religious sect.
You didn't leave them, Ian. They left you.
Well, indeed. Yeah, well, see,
yes, there are shades of the same.
No, I mean it as a warning.
Yeah.
I mean it as a warning.
But
it's coming.
I fear it is. But you see, also, we don't look at it from their point of view, where from their point of view, he actually ran a rather successful economy. And if you look at the stats, that it does bear that out in many, many ways. Black employment, for example, far higher under Trump than any other president. And so he's able to trumpet that all the time. His foreign policy, there were mistakes, but actually overall, there were some achievements there. Whereas we tend to look at him as a preposterous figure who did no good for America whatsoever.
What would you say were his foreign policy achievements?
Well, I think even though it didn't actually come to anything, I think he was quite courageous to do what he did with North Korea.
Do you?
And Biden has done absolutely nothing along those lines. I think in terms of the Middle East peace process, if there is such a thing or was such a thing, you can make a very good argument for him having done far more than Barack Obama ever did to do that, where he, or Jared Kushner actually, was the architect of the Abraham Accords, sort of normalising relations between Israel and some Arab states. Unthinkable a few years before. The move of the embassy, which everyone said at the time was absolutely diabolical, it would be incendiary, it wasn't.
Can those Abraham Accords survive, do you think?
Yes, I think they can. Because
I'm not so sure.
Again, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on this, but what I genuinely believe is that there are plenty of Arab states now who do realise that normalising relations with Israel is a good thing.
Well, existentially a good thing.
And I think that I still think that there's always been back channels between Israel and all of these states. But publicly, they could never really say anything about it, whereas they are now. And even now, some of them think that Israel is doing the Arab world a favour by getting rid or trying to get rid of Hamas.
Yes.
Oh,
God. When Emily Maitlis came back from America to do one of her regular sort of thermometer applications to the public mood, she said it is all about the price of gasoline. I mean, the people just look at the simplest. We started our conversation today talking about how the cost of living trumps all the stuff about immigration, and for an American punter, it's how much it costs us to fill up the truck or to fill up the car with petrol. It's bad, and that's why people are thinking, that change is as good as a rest. So they don't go that.
Saves my car.
Yeah, I don't think that your average American voter is looking at foreign policy much. I mean, some of the big picture tickets.
We haven't mentioned Biden yet.
No, and he's close to being a liability.
Well, he is. I think he is a liability. You look at his approval ratings now, and they are very low. And I think it's quite difficult to imagine him being able to pull that back.
And it's not fair, because he might be a little bit doddery, but he's not giving speeches in which he makes it clear he does want to be a dictator, which Trump has done twice in the last, depending on when you're listening to this, he's done it twice in the last month, unless you're listening to this in June 2024, in which case he's probably done it 30 times in the last 6.
If you're listening to this in June 2024, get a life.
Yes, I think that's sage. That is sage advice.
By then.
So it might not be fair to have his supporters zoning in on his age and fragility, perceived fragility, in the same way that his critics are. But in terms of electoral arithmetic, if that is being zoned on, if that does have pertinence among voters, then it becomes a liability. I sometimes think that people on the liberal side of politics, on both sides of the Atlantic, have far too much faith in fairness, and they just think, it will all come out in the fairness will.
When in fact it's brutal.
Well, actually, it won't. It won't, and it's gone now. You're never going to get that genie back in the bottle of Joe Biden's perceived fragility and age.
When I was in Washington in March of this year, I met Valerie Biden, his sister, who is said to be one of the most influential people on him, one of his key advisors. I really wonder whether she or somebody close to him does need to have a word and say, look,
don't run.
Do you not think he should consider not running? Because it's getting to the point where it's too late.
Who instead of him?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Kamala Harris is apparently not very popular at all.
Have you seen the Instagram skits of Kamala Harris?
No.
They're very funny.
Well, Saturday Night Live stuff or just...
they're specific. The Saturday Night Live. Just ordinary influencers and people. Yeah. They're very funny about how she never gets to the point.
There are
a bit like me and my Sue Gray story.
I mean, Pete Buttigieg, for example, but I mean, he's gay. Could you have a gay American president? I don't know.
Let's get a woman out of the way first, shall we?
Well, there are plenty of people in the Democratic Party who could do the job, but would they be able to stand up against Trump? I mean, I think there is actually a possibility of it not being a Biden-Trump election. It could be
two
X
other
versus
people.
X.
Yes,
I think it's probably a 5 or 10% possibility of that.
In which case, all bets are off.
When do we know? By the way, when do we find out?
Well, the primaries start in February in New Hampshire. So, I mean, if somebody else is going to come to the fore, if Biden is going to make a decision, he needs to do it pretty soon.
And you won't have one without the other. No one's going to launch a hostile takeover. It has to be Biden's bidding, and I think it does. And I think I'd be amazed if, whether it's his sister or someone else, I'd be amazed if people weren't having this conversation with them already, just in private.
I know you said... rightly, I think that American voters aren't looking at foreign policy that much, unless it's about their sons and daughters dying, which is legitimate. But that speech he gave on the 9th of October in Israel, standing next to Netanyahu, again, for all the sort of shakiness of how he speaks sometimes, he doesn't always speak that way. Sometimes he still has that force and that flash of force.
True.
And I think that speech was an example of it. I think that
he didn't fluff his lines. But big deal.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about the content of the speech as much as anything else. I think his perceived dodderiness, to use yours, and it's not just perceived, some of it is there clearly, gets in the way sometimes of the content. Because I'll admit myself, when I watch him on telly, and when he was in Ireland and he came out to that fantastic song, and I was, my whole being was going, "Don't fall over, don't fall over, don't fall over." Yeah. But that speech, I mean, I'd urge people, if they don't recollect it or they haven't read it or seen it, go back and look at it, because nearly 3 months on from October the 7th now, he already knew. He already knew what the world was going to be up against and what Israel and Gaza was going to be up against. He already knew the dangers. And I think he encapsulated it brilliantly in that speech.
You played that on the Monday after the 3 hostages got shot.
That's right.
After the 2 women in the certainly this is how it was reported at the time in the church, and you're right, it was prescient. He's a statesman, though, and that's the tragedy of the PR failure that surrounds him, is that he is a statesman of some decades standing.
But
it's knowledge and depth.
Yes, exactly.
But there are senior people in the Democratic Party. David Axelrod, who was a very senior advisor to Barack Obama. He's broken cover. And when people like that break cover, I think we should sit up and take...
I am. I'm not disputing what you're saying. I'm just saying there might be an unfairness to it. But so what? Because you want to win elections, you don't sit around talking about how unfairly your man is being treated. If it's so unfair that he's going to lose as a consequence of how he's being portrayed, then you swap him out. You swap him out.
And he should know that too.
Do you understand how Trump... I mean, apart from MAGA, because getting over 50% in polls is not just... people who turn up to the rallies and buy the
it's sustained support.
Buy the top Trump cards and whatever else he's flogging this week. The what do they call it?
He just has this ability to cut through in a way that most politicians don't. But when Summer, even though he is from the American establishment, he's very successfully portrayed himself as an anti-establishment figure.
And final word then, they've been told that they can choose their own facts now as well, which is probably probably the deal breaker.
There are, of course, mayoral elections in this country, which I know everybody's terribly excited by. We have London, Manchester,
Liverpool
City region.
I'm not sure Birmingham is up, is it?
Is it not?
In May? Don't think it is, but I may be proved wrong on that. Let's start off with London. It is the capital city, after all. There was a point where I was beginning to doubt whether Sadiq Khan would win, and there is still part of me that wonders if Jeremy Corbyn gets involved, which he's kind of threatening to, showing a bit of ankle. And given that the electoral system is now not PR, it's first past the post for mayoral elections, that could give the Conservative candidate a little bit of a chance. Now, Susan Hall is the Conservative. Stop it. I did the only debate between the final 2, her and
the other fellow.
Who
the gentleman who lost.
Yes, Mad Moz, as we called him after the programme. But I remember when she walked into the studio, and I don't remember ever interviewing her before, but she said, "Iain, you made me cry last night."
Oh, yeah.
I was thinking, she said, because you were talking about us and you said that you didn't think either of us were up to it. And I was sitting in my car and I cried and I felt like an absolute heel. And
But did you stand by your position?
After that hour, certainly.
Yes.
But I think she has got a chance. I genuinely do.
Still?
Back to our Trump
if Corbyn stands and takes 10 or 15 percentage points off Sadiq Khan, which he easily could do, you can see the circumstances where she could prevail.
Yes.
Would Corbyn do that just to stick it to the Labour Party?
Well, he would never admit he was doing that, but that would be...
But he'd be sticking it to Sadiq Khan as well, who was always quite diplomatic in his dealings with Jeremy Corbyn, and of course was one of the MPs that nominated him for the leadership in the first place. Lammy did as well, because they both wanted to sort of put the votes that Corbyn might have some influence over in their back pockets, while obviously not expecting him to actually become leader of the Labour Party, because Sadiq Khan and David Lammy were both mayoral candidates at the time, so they tried to cleverly. That worked out well.
Well done, lads.
Yeah, exactly that.
That went well.
Exactly that. I mean, I think we can all agree that Susan Hall has shone a light upon the problem of crime on the London Underground.
I think for those people who missed the conversation, it was her Oyster card, was her travel card.
Yes.
When
she fell out of her pocket and got wedged between 2 other seats, and she came on LBC the following morning to describe, really it was up there with Brinksmat and the Great Train Robbery in the way that it had been presented prior to her appearance, during which she revealed that it had actually been returned to her by a Good Samaritan with, and this is crucial lest anyone think that anyone might have picked a pocket or two, with the cash still in it.
Oh my goodness. But is she what's her shtick? What's she offering?
Safe streets, safer with Susan. That's her slogan.
Safer with Susan.
I mean, to be fair, I think she got no support from the Conservative Party when she was selected.
I thought that was odd.
No support whatsoever. Now, they have now taken over the campaign because I think they see that there is a possibility of winning. And to be fair to her, I think she has come out with a few sort of interesting policy ideas. Please don't ask me what they are.
Well, I don't know that you'd let anyone get away with that, would you, if they were on your programme? No. Well, you crack on, though. You're among friends.
This is a Christmas spirit.
Yes, absolutely.
Play here. And I think when she's been on with Nick Ferrari doing a couple of phone-ins, I don't think she's sort of had a terrible time.
No. Only disgraced herself once.
Did she?
With the pickpocketing. I think Enoch Powell tweets, what are we going to call them? Unfortunate?
Well, I think that's one word to describe them.
Yes. And
we've all tweeted things that we regret, James, I'm sure.
Not about Enoch Powell.
Well, I'm speaking now. I speak to you as a Londoner, not as a journalist. Whoever wins.
Hang on.
What?
A resident.
When have you been in London?
A resident of London.
Sadiq
council
Khan
tax
has changed the rules. If you live in London,
you're a Londoner.
And work in London and play in London, you're a Londoner.
I'm
a Londoner.
We're all Londoners now.
When they approached me to run for them, 3 times, by the way, I kept saying to them, you do realise I don't live in London. That's a little bit of an issue, don't you think? Oh, no, we can get round that. You work in
really
London, so that's fine. I thought, oh, my God.
But as a Londoner, a London voter, put it that way, they've just got to fix the traffic jams. It's crazy out there.
If you could go all in on that and somehow have ownership of an alternative to that, I think anyone could win at the moment. I think the levels of frustration with traffic in London.
Too late.
If you sort of put yourself up as the laxative that will unclog London's roads. You've got both a slogan.
Rather unfortunate images come to mind there, James.
Shelaxative. She's on your side.
There you go. Safer with Susan.
Last week when I had my show's Christmas dinner,
yes,
and I then had to get from the Hippodrome, which is where we had it, to a hotel in West London.
Took you 3 days.
It did. How did you know
you
that?
were in a car?
I was in a car.
Yeah, so I would...
But I mean, this was like it was 1 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, that shouldn't... Yeah, that
and
is
you think,
appalling.
what is going on?
It's insane.
There's a stretch of road between Chiswick and Brentford that has been dug up for the last 2.5 years, and they're putting in cycle lanes, but no one's really talked. And also, I don't think it's a mayoral responsibility, is it? It's local councils a lot of the time.
No, it is in London. It's under TfL.
Or all of it. Even the decision to put a cycle lane, because Kensington managed to take one out again. So I don't know that cycle lanes and LTNs are not in the gift of the local councils. Okay. TfL. But no one ever tells us what the end game is. No one ever says... This is why we're doing it, and I hate motoring phone-ins. I don't go near them.
Love them.
But
give me an electric vehicle for any day.
But is the end game to make it? And this is a serious question. Yeah. Is the end game to make it so insufferable to drive in London?
That's exactly.
That you
that's
just
TfL's
never do
strategy.
again.
That's what you think it is.
No, I'm absolutely convinced.
Yes, but they haven't said so. If they said so, you could take a view. Well, why not? You could take a view on it. I'd be more supportive. I'd be more supportive if they said we're going to turn it into Amsterdam, and the only way we can do it is to make your car intolerable.
But I remember when Sadiq Khan first became mayor, and I don't know what I was interviewing about. Anyway, I said, right, Sadiq, there's one thing that you can do to make all our lives better. So, if you're driving along the embankment towards Big Ben, you used to be able to turn left onto Westminster Bridge. Now you can't. You have to turn right and go all the way around Parliament Square.
That's why I hate motoring phones.
And I said, how is that environmentally friendly? Because you've added at least half a mile, so you're adding to emissions. He said, well, yeah, it's terrible, isn't it? Yeah. Do something about it. Has he? No.
Would you like a laxative?
That's it, you see. That's going to be the big takeaway. The she-laxative. So she-laxative for London.
I tell you what I'm glad about. King's Speech, right? First King's Speech.
Yeah.
Those pedal taxis. I hate them.
Rickshaws.
I hate them.
Yeah.
And whenever I say this to friends of mine or anybody else, they tell me I'm miserable.
Oh.
And I just think, no. If I put a blaring music on the front of my car, I'd be stopped from doing so.
Yeah.
You're not registered, you're not safe, get off the roads. So I was delighted with that Conservative proposition
But why have they waited so long? Because
God knows.
And why was it in the King's speech?
I know.
Pathetic little
speech
measure.
of a certain paucity of policy.
I could take them off the road in a week. Shelagh.
Stop it now.
I can remember doing phone-ins on those back when we were at London Only.
Yes.
Yeah.
2012 or something.
And even then they were dull.
Not the way I did it, James.
Oh, of course not.
Potholes next year.
Potholes.
Anyway, Manchester, well, obviously the King of the North is going to win that one, isn't he?
Yeah.
I've lived
Andy
there
Burnham.
twice.
I've lived there once.
Have you?
I've never lived there. I've never lived in the North.
Never lived in the North?
No.
Do you know where it is?
Above Watford, I think.
Oh, yes, definitely above.
Andy Burnham seems to be in clover, really.
Well, I don't think he is. I think he really wants to come back to Westminster, but can't quite work out a way of doing it.
Oh, I don't disagree with that. I just meant in terms of his electoral prospects as mayor of Manchester.
He said to, who did he say this to? I was speaking to them, Andrew Marr. He said to him in a conversation recently, "You're playing footsie with me again."
Am I?
That's not what Andy Burnham said.
That would be a story.
He said to Andrew Marr that he thinks if/when Labour win the next election, not only will there be that feel-good factor that comes from change or from a big victory, which, depending on how you voted, obviously, but there will be a sense of that inevitably. You saw it in 97, didn't you? That sense of change. But he believes that the mayoral structures and some commitments that Labour have already announced and will announce more of around the old localism thing, feeding power where it needs to be, will actually make some things possible faster than people might think.
And remember, there are already quite a few new mayoral ones coming along that the Conservatives have announced.
Yeah.
I mean, how you have a mayor of a county, I'm not sure, but I think it's going to be a mayor of...
Well, the Liverpool City Region mayor is a bit
Norfolk
like a
and
mayor of a
Suffolk.
county.
I mean, I can't see how that works, but...
Well, Steve Rotherham's is a bit like that, isn't it? It's not just a city. And if you think of Andy Burnham's patch, it's huge.
Yeah.
That reach, it's a huge area. So I hope he's right. I mean, that's just Andy Burnham's theory, but I hope he's right about that. Interestingly, though, with Manchester, they were the first, I think they're the only place that's had a pilot of NHS and social care being run centrally at the same time together, rather than just either successfully or not so successfully dovetailing in the right places for individuals. They've actually organised it in a very joined up way.
And this is the sort of thing that Starmer needs to do. He needs to come in and not tinker at the edges or make bloody pledges.
Show how that works. How it worked well, and then start rolling it.
And I think he has got a health secretary who will challenge a lot of conventional thinking.
Big fan of his.
I'm a big fan of his. Have you read his book?
Yes, I have. And it is an extraordinary story.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think he'll challenge conventional thinking. He'll challenge vested interests. He's not afraid of challenging the NHS unions as well, which often needs to be done. So I would have high hopes there, but he's got to be given the resources to be able to do it. Because
or the freedom to find them.
I mean, if you look at all of the different attempts at reforming the NHS since 2010, I think because they haven't, the various administrations didn't try and take NHS people with them, whether it's management or workers, they've floundered. Now, you may say, well, they were always bound to. But I just hope that if there is going to be a Labour government, that is one of their priorities, and they're much more successful.
He comes onto my show quite a lot, as you know, to take calls.
The two things then that people probably care most about would be the NHS and the cost of living. What can a Labour government do about the other one? What can it do about the cost of living in the first 100 days?
Nothing.
No?
In the first 100 days?
Not to actually affect individual people in the first 100 days. They can introduce a lot of measures. There will be a budget, presumably, within the first 100 days. But if there's going to be no extra spending anywhere apart from this sort of mythical non-dom money and
which is covering an awful lot, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Then you think, what's the point of having a budget?
And on that bombshell, thank you ever so much for joining me, James O'Brien, Shelagh Fogarty, and Iain Dale for this unexpurgated Christmas special, which we genuinely hope you've enjoyed. Happy New Year.